Welcome back, everyone. Michael here with Offshore Citizen. If you have not been following, there has been this thing going on in Canada, and now it has spread to Australia, New Zealand, France. I think they're going to Belgium, that they're calling the Freedom Convoy. And seeing as I'm from Canada, I figured I would take a moment to kind of give you my response, my reaction to what is going on. And in particular, one of the things that I try to do on this channel is I try not to give the normal kind of, I guess you would call it a take, the response that you would hear everywhere else. I try to kind of think about it from a different perspective so you can get a different lens on the same issues. And so I'm going to give you my perspective on what is going on right now. Hopefully you enjoy it. Tell me in the comments below what you guys think. Put it down below, based on what I say. Tell me I'm an idiot. Tell me, I'd like to hear why you think things more so than what you think. I think that's always the more interesting point of view. So let's begin. Before we do, if you haven't already, please hit the subscribe button, hit the all notification bell. If you'd like help with the things that we deal with here on this channel, which is relocating internationally, setting up your business around the world, paying the lowest legal amount of tax possible, getting residencies, citizenships, etc. If you're from one of these countries and want to leave, please reach out to us. You can book a call, calendly.com/Michael-Rosmer, link in the description below, or send a message to our websites, offshorecitizen.net and offshorecapitalist.com. So, as I said, I am originally Canadian. I don't live in Canada now. I haven't lived there for quite a number of years, but still is my home country. My family still lives there, etc. And if you haven't followed, what essentially has happened is that over the last 2 years, I guess, the Canadian response to COVID has been one of the more aggressive ones around the world. More lockdowns, more restrictions, fairly aggressive on vaccine mandates, etc. And so there was quite a number of people who were going along with this, a bunch who were not, and a bunch who were going along with it but not happy with it. And that third group is really important. We'll talk about them in a minute. But what reached the tipping point was truckers were told that in order to do cross-border runs, they would have to get vaccinated. And so this is arguably not what the Freedom Convoy movement is about, but it was the straw that broke the camel's back, so to speak, kind of pushing it one step too far, at which a movement developed of truckers who decided they're going to get their trucks, they're going to drive to Ottawa, they're going to park their trucks there, occupy the city and protest and say enough is enough, we need to change this. So that started out fairly small and quickly snowballed because there's a lot of people who feel very passionately about this subject. A lot of people who are super upset over what's going on. They feel that it's a tyrannical government, that they're opposing things in a way that is destroying freedoms, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so now there are, tens, hundreds of thousands of people, whatever the number is. It's hard to get accurate numbers, but certainly tens of thousands of people involved and probably millions of people supporting it. You have Donald Trump, who is busy, giving speeches, telling the truckers, hey, listen, we support you, and when you're done, come down to Washington. You have, on the other side, various different governors in the states have expressed support. They've started the same movement in Australia, in New Zealand, in France. The French government is saying they won't allow them into Paris, so we'll see how that goes. There's some movement to go into Brussels in the same way. We'll see what happens across the board with those. But the point is, there's clearly millions of people who feel passionate about this and are, supporting it. Now, where does that leave us? Well, they showed up, they blockaded large parts of the city or made it difficult to move there. They've now blockaded some of the borders across Canada. There are various different cities where people have kind of like rally support movements, etc. And so the Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, at first basically just scorned and ignored them, basically said, hey, they're a fringe minority. Then he kind of took off and vanished, said he got COVID. Then he came back and he basically has made the statement that he refused to deal with them, that it's not okay what they're doing, that it needs to stop, that they're going to call in the police. Then they've called in the police, they've confiscated fuel. They were raising money on GoFundMe. They'd raised about $9.5 million, I think it was. And then GoFundMe decided to freeze the funds. And there was a huge controversy because at first the message was that they were going to distribute it to charities that GoFundMe approved. They kind of backtracked on that and said people who wanted their money back could get a refund, or other ones they could distribute to another charity that was approved by GoFundMe. A few of the governors in the U.S. said they're going to launch investigations into GoFundMe over this. There's other sites that have propped up. Now, most recently, Doug Ford from Ontario, one of the politicians there, has brought an injunction against, or got a court injunction to freeze the funds of these different groups. And so, yeah, hopefully that gives you kind of a high level of where we are at just in terms of the overall facts, okay? So what can we kind of glean from all of this, or what is my perspective? So first of all, full disclosure, I am not at all a Justin Trudeau fan. I think he's a terrible leader, a terrible prime minister. I think the way that he gets elected based on image is focusing on the exact wrong thing that you should be voting for a politician on. I don't think he's particularly effective. I don't think he's particularly insightful. He may be well-intentioned, that's possible. So he either, I guess to say that he's well-intentioned is probably the best way of saying it positively if we want to, give him some credit. Because if he's not well-intentioned, well then, all the rest falls apart. But I think he ends up doing things without understanding the long-term consequences of them, or, he's deliberately doing it that way, in which case that would be much worse. So that's Justin Trudeau. He has not responded, in my opinion, well through this at all, because he hasn't led. So let's look at two things here. One is, okay, what's led up to this? Another is, what position does it put you in? Now, in my opinion, strategically, he's put himself into a very bad position by not talking to them. So by refusing to have conversations with these groups, by refusing to go and say, hey, listen, we're going to have discourse, I want to understand you, I'm your prime minister, I represent you, etc. Instead, just kind of like stonewalling them. The problem with that is that it doesn't put you in a good position to get out and save your image. So if you were in a situation where you'd gone in to begin with and said, hey, listen, I'm going to talk to you, I'm going to listen to you, listen, I understand, guys, I hear your problems, yeah, there have been some things that have been messed up, I understand how you could feel that, this was tyrannical, look at it from this side, go through this whole conversation. If he had done that, then he could negotiate some resolution and he could come out looking good. The problem now is that if he goes and enters a bargaining position with them, then he looks weak and they look strong and it looks like they won, which is really bad for his optics, right? It's like he gave in. And so that was not smart. In addition to that, he probably could have diffused or reduced the challenges if he'd been in a situation where he'd gone and talked to them earlier on. And now what's happened is it's kind of snowballed and it becomes increasingly significant, not just locally, but globally. They said apparently $350 million of trade per day crosses the border by Windsor, and that was restricted. So, you can kind of see how now vehicle plants get shut down, now supplies don't come in, now prices of things go up, now supply chains are disrupted, now you get businesses putting pressure on the government to do something about it, etc. So, there's this complex array where I think in general, it was kind of an arrogant and ignorant move. So, call that what it is. We'll see how that goes. Now, at the same time, you can go into asking like, okay, well, what's going on here, right? Now, some people's criticism of this situation is they'll say, hey, listen, it's okay to protest, but it's not okay to shut down people's lives, to prevent businesses from going, etc. Now, in reality, a lot of those same people weren't saying the same things when Black Lives Matter protests were shutting things down and causing damage to monuments and things like that. So there's one side of it on that there that's kind of a double standard. In addition, you're in a bit of a situation where you could look at unions, right? When unions do strikes, what happens? They shut businesses down. That's the whole point, right? They simply prevent things from happening. You can say, oh, it's a public safety hazard. Well, when garbage men go on strike and there's no garbage being collected, that's a public safety hazard. So, there's like a very fine line here, which is difficult to navigate of, how do you go through this? To me, the problem for the whole government response in general, and this has been pretty universally global, in my opinion, they've handled it very, very badly, is They have eroded trust and legitimacy. So let's just kind of consider the situation. You say, oh, well, what we want is we want these lockdowns. Why? We need these lockdowns for safety because hospitals are getting overwhelmed because, it's like, okay, well, hang on a minute. If that's the case, why is it that you are firing nurses and doctors who are unvaccinated if you really need them, right? Hard to make that argument. Number two, why is it that you won't allow a nurse or doctor who is unvaccinated but has tested negative for COVID, but you will allow a nurse or doctor who is vaccinated who has tested positive for COVID because you apparently need them? This is like a ridiculously bad double standard. That's actually a real example that literally has happened in Canada. So that's a really, really bad standard to be able to say, to maintain that, hey, this is why we're doing things, right? There's a contradiction, there's like hypocrisy in that message. Then you can say things like, hey, public gatherings are banned, but Black Lives Matter protests are okay, which is something that happened. Hey, listen, you're not allowed to go to church, but you can get packed into an airplane. And some people might say, well, hang on, the ventilation systems in airplanes are really good, so they purify air, et cetera. Okay, fair enough, but the truth is they're in airports, and the airports are packed similarly. So, it's hard to maintain these two positions simultaneously. And what that does is it communicates to people that this is not legitimate, that this is not a threat, that you're not really doing this for the reasons that you say, but that rather it is an exercise in control and tyranny, et cetera. And that's just really, really bad. So Vitalik wrote a fantastic piece a little while back. You can go to his blog, vitalik.ca, and it was on how legitimacy is the most scarce resource. And when you lose legitimacy, it's a big, big issue. So one of the things that's happened in the world today, and it's really bad, it's not a good thing. Some people might be happy about it, et cetera, but I think if you kind of fast forward through where you're going, what ends up happening? Well, there's been a situation where what you want is you want your laws to seem legitimate. You want people to want to follow the laws, or at least not have a problem with following the laws. Okay? The moment that people feel like the laws are illegitimate, in large numbers, right? Like you're always going to have a certain percentage of the population which is deviant. I don't know what that is, 0.1% or something like that, but it's very small. The moment that you have a large percentage of the population who believe, hey, listen, these laws are not okay, this is not legitimate, this shouldn't be in place, and therefore we need to go around them. Now you're suddenly in a situation where you normalize breaking the law. And that's really bad. You do not want a society where you normalize breaking the law, because once somebody does this thing, which that thing they perceive as legitimate, now they've crossed the threshold into saying, well, hey, listen, the law isn't the standard. Now, why not this other thing, and this other thing, and this other thing? And pretty soon that goes down a road to potentially chaos, anarchy, like all kinds of social disorder. There's a bunch of things that you don't really want happening. And that was a big issue. Now, on the flip side, what has been the attempt of mainstream media, et cetera, was to try and delegitimize the trucker movement, et cetera. And the truckers have been pretty smart to try and maintain legitimacy by being nonviolent, by, okay, there was very early on some vandalism, et cetera, but they basically put up guards to protect those things, to try and prevent it. They've kind of communicated always a nonviolent, non-resistant type approach. And then similarly, there were examples of people carrying around Confederate flags, which it was a funny criticism because, you could go and look at pictures and see that, there's like millions of Canadian flags and, one or two Confederate flags, and Canadians don't even care about Confederate flags. So it's a very bizarre scenario there. But, driving those types of people and that type of influences out helps to maintain their legitimacy in the eyes of a broader population, right? And unfortunately, the quote-unquote moral ground that people are coming from who are opposing it, like say the politicians like Trudeau, he says, hey, listen, it's not okay to shut things down and disrupt people's lives. And the counter that they have, which is legitimate, is, hey, listen, you've just done that for the last 2 years. So again, like there's not this position which is very strong. At the same time, you have something like when Doug Ford goes and tries to get these restrictions on people's banking. Well, look, when you freeze people's bank accounts, you drive adoption for crypto. It's a very short-term thinking attitude where you say, hey, listen, we're going to do this because we're going to be strong, we're going to get what we want, et cetera. And you may succeed. Some people will ask, hey, how can they do that? Isn't the company in the U.S., et cetera? Like, yeah, but you could always freeze bank accounts on the Canadian side. then you can go and you can, once you've got a court ruling or court injunction, now you can take that to the U.S. and you can try and get courts in the U.S. to enforce it. There's some stuff that can happen there that certainly can make it difficult. Then you can go to Visa and MasterCard and you can put pressure on them. You can go to the banks and you can put pressure on them. You can have this cascading effect, and there are certain bottlenecks that you can target. But the problem is, well, when you do that, again, you're just driving adoption for crypto. And so even if you succeed, the question is, you better succeed really, really well, because you're opening the door for further issues down the road. And that's, I guess, kind of what I want to finalize on here. So what has happened over the last little while? And by the way, another one that will probably come under heat is Telegram. Apparently people are coordinating through Telegram chats. And so, of course, what's going to happen? They're going to come and say, well, hang on a minute, Telegram is bad because Telegram is supporting these, etc. And so there's some risk that ends up happening, which would be kind of dumb, because the truth is, you leave Telegram and you go to Discord, you go to Signal, you go to there's always going to be another channel. If the politicians and people like that go after Telegram, they will be, it's not going to be very effective. And of course, Telegram is sufficiently popular, unlike, so back in the day when there were things with Trump, kind of post the election, they ended up removing Parler, the app, right, from Google Play Store and the Apple App Store. Okay, you could get away with that because it was a relatively small percentage of the population who was using it. Telegram is used by hundreds of millions of people around the world. Really, really hard to go after it. Just like at this stage, it's really hard to go after crypto because of the fact that so many people are using it. But I think why this is a really interesting incident is because it tells a little bit about what the future is going to be like. Like, this will not be the last of these types of incidents, right? There will be other incidents in the future where people will be upset. And increasingly, people have tools and options that are growing in order to combat this. And I think the truckers, whether by luck or by strategy, picked a really, really good time to do this. The thing is, we've seen UK, Denmark, etc., open up and remove all restrictions. The move in the world right now is towards opening up. We know coming into summers, they've always opened up in summers, etc. And so Canada, pretty much inevitably, whether they do this or not, whether the truckers did this or not, are in a position where they're going to have to open up. The problem for them, strategically right now, is that when they do so, they're going to look like they've given in to the truckers. Unless they break this Freedom Convoy movement prior to doing it, right? They break it, and then they can put a delay in, and then they can open things up. Already, if you look at Canada, a couple of the provinces have opened up and removed a bunch of restrictions, etc. They removed O'Toole, who was the head of the Conservative Party, who was the official opposition, etc. So there's already examples of things where it's okay, there's been some forward movement that they can consider as wins for the truckers. If the country as a whole opens up, it's the optics of it, no matter why it happened, is going to look as though Trudeau lost, Trudeau gave in, and the Freedom Convoy won, and they were powerful. And even if you go and try and round them up with arrests later on, if all of this stuff, the optics is that. And the new standard that you set is, listen, people can get their way by taking these types of actions. And so I think it's a really bad strategic place for the government to be in. And I think that governments over the last while have been really, really dumb in how they haven't considered this point about legitimacy and trust. And what they've done is they've kind of had, in certain cases, people like Trudeau, had kind of this arrogant view where there's a pretty large cross-section of the population. I mean, if you look at, there's about 15% of Canadians who are completely unvaccinated, completely unvaccinated. And then a lot who are vaccinated who aren't fans of vaccine mandates and lockdowns and all this sort of thing. So, Trudeau's trying to say, hey, 90% of Canadians support this stuff. It's no, you're being naive and dumb to say that. Maybe 85% of people went along with it. Of those, maybe a decent share actually were in favor of it or were willing to do it, but weren't in favor of it going on some other people, etc. So, you've probably got 30+% of the population who are in opposition. That's actually a really big share, right? It's a significant portion of the population who is against you. And it just is a really, really bad look. And not to acknowledge a certain group of people, to just act like they aren't there, to take this kind of arrogant, sort of high and mighty approach, doesn't, people dislike it. It makes them upset, it makes them angry, and then it leads to things like this. So I think that what we're going to see globally is more of this. And each time it happens, there's going to be more and more tools in place to empower those people. And so I would suspect that what you will see is over the coming, 10 years, 10, 15 years, a lot more of these in a lot of traditional Western countries, and it's going to dramatically change the dynamics of power and the way in which power gets negotiated. We'll see how that goes. I don't think this is necessarily a really great thing. One of the lessons to learn from the truckers is coordination is power, right? As individuals, they weren't strong. As a group, they're very strong. And if you start to erode the structures that hold us together, then you lose those coordination mechanisms, and there's a lot of big problems in the world that are important to solve in that way, and it's very, very short-sighted. So anyway, I hope that helps. I'd love to hear what you guys have to say, and if you want to leave your country, reach out to us, and I'm going to look forward to seeing you on the next video.